At 4:17 in the morning on February 6, 2023, millions of people in southern Turkey were jolted awake by a force few humans ever experience. Without warning, the ground ruptured along the East Anatolian fault system, releasing energy built up over centuries. This was not a brief tremor or a rolling shake, but a violent sideways tearing of the earth that lasted roughly 80 terrifying seconds. Entire cities were thrown into chaos before most residents even understood what was happening. The main earthquake measured magnitude 7.8, making it one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in the region. Its epicenter was located west of the city of Gaziantep, in an area where multiple tectonic plates grind past one another. The rupture occurred at a shallow depth of around 10 kilometers, a critical factor that dramatically increased surface damage. Shallow earthquakes transfer far more destructive energy directly into buildings, roads, and people. Ground shaking reached levels 10 and 11 on the modified Mercalli intensity scale, described as violent to extreme. At this intensity, even well-built structures can suffer severe damage, while weaker buildings are almost guaranteed to collapse. Residents described the ground moving sideways in sharp, snapping motions rather than gentle waves. The noise of cracking earth, shattering glass, and collapsing concrete filled the darkness. Within seconds, entire neighborhoods across southern Turkey and northern Syria were reduced to rubble. In the freezing winter night, survivors stumbled outside in shock, surrounded by dust clouds and broken buildings. Communications failed almost immediately, leaving many cities cut off from help. Before the sun rose, it was already clear that this was not just a major earthquake, but the beginning of one of the worst disasters of the modern era. As survivors struggled to process what had just happened, the disaster escalated in a way few earthquakes ever do. Roughly 9 hours after the first rupture, the ground convulsed again, this time with a magnitude 7.7 earthquake centered farther north near the town of Ikanozu. This was not a typical aftershock, but a second major rupture triggered by the immense stress released along the fault system earlier that morning. Any sense of safety that remained vanished instantly. Buildings that had survived the first earthquake while badly cracked now collapsed without warning. Rescue workers and civilians searching through debris were forced to flee as streets split and walls came down around them. The psychological toll was immense, as people realized the ground itself could not be trusted. Many survivors refused to enter any structure, even undamaged ones, fearing another collapse. This second quake marked the beginning of an extraordinary aftershock sequence. By the spring of 2023, more than 30,000 aftershocks had been recorded across the region. Some were strong enough to cause additional building failures, including a damaging earthquake in late February that further destabilized already weakened areas. Each tremor slowed rescue efforts and deepened the trauma for millions of people. The geographic scale of the disaster was staggering. In Turkey alone, 11 provinces were officially declared disaster zones, covering an area home to over 14 million people. This region also included nearly 2 million Syrian refugees who had already escaped years of war. Across the border in Syria, millions more were affected, many living in fragile buildings and informal housing that stood little chance against such powerful shaking. What began as a single earthquake had now become a prolonged regional catastrophe, stretching emergency resources to their absolute limits. As daylight revealed the full scale of destruction, entire cities appeared as if they had been bombed. Across southern Turkey, vast stretches of urban neighborhoods were flattened, with apartment blocks pancaked into layers of concrete. At least 230,000 buildings were either completely destroyed or damaged beyond repair, and close to 300,000 structures were affected overall. In many areas, streets were no longer recognizable, buried beneath debris and dust. The city of Antakya in Hatay province suffered some of the worst devastation. One of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, Antakya lost whole districts in a matter of seconds. In certain neighborhoods, nearly every structure collapsed, leaving nothing but open ground where communities once stood. Historic markets, residential blocks, and public spaces were erased almost entirely. The volume of debris created was almost unimaginable. In Turkey alone, an estimated 100 million cubic meters of rubble covered the affected provinces. This was many times greater than the debris produced by the 1999 Izmit earthquake, overwhelming cleanup crews and slowing rescue operations. Heavy machinery struggled to navigate the wreckage, while narrow streets trapped under concrete made access nearly impossible. Critical infrastructure also failed on a massive scale. Hospitals, schools, airports, and government buildings were damaged or destroyed. Crippling emergency response efforts, power lines were severed, water systems collapsed, and roads cracked or sank, isolating entire communities. Even cultural landmarks were not spared, with sections of ancient fortifications and historic sites collapsing. What remained was not just physical destruction, but the collapse of daily life itself. As rescue efforts continued, the true human cost of the disaster became clearer with each passing day. In Turkey alone, the confirmed death toll rose to 53,537 people. Across the border in Syria, at least 5,951 deaths were officially recorded, though the real number is believed to be higher due to the challenges of reporting in war-torn areas. Combined, more than 60,000 lives were lost, making this the deadliest earthquake disaster in modern Turkish history. Tens of thousands more survived with injuries, many of them severe. In Turkey, over 107,000 people were wounded, including countless victims pulled from the rubble days after the shaking stopped. Hospitals that were still standing were overwhelmed, while damaged medical facilities struggled to operate with limited power, staff, and supplies. Emergency workers faced freezing winter conditions as they searched for survivors, often hearing voices fade away before help could reach them. The scale of displacement was equally staggering. Around 3,300,000 people in Turkey were forced from their homes, suddenly left without shelter, income, or basic necessities. Entire families moved into tents, makeshift shelters, or container cities, unsure if they would ever return to their neighborhoods. Many others fled to distant provinces, becoming internally displaced almost overnight. For Syrian communities, the disaster was especially devastating. Millions were already living in extreme poverty after more than a decade of conflict, and the earthquake stripped away what little stability remained. In northwest Syria, where most residents relied on humanitarian aid even before the quake, the destruction pushed entire populations into deeper crisis. Beyond the physical losses, the emotional trauma left behind was immense, with survivors facing grief, uncertainty, and the haunting absence of loved ones buried beneath the ruins. As the dust settled, attention turned to why the destruction had been so extreme. Experts quickly pointed to building quality as a decisive factor. Turkey had strengthened its seismic building codes after earlier disasters, yet many of the structures that collapsed were newer apartment blocks that should have survived. Investigations revealed widespread use of poor materials, illegal modifications, and weak enforcement of safety standards. The earthquakes exposed how decades of unchecked construction and regulatory failures had quietly turned a natural hazard into a human catastrophe. The disaster also sparked a wave of legal and political consequences. Contractors, engineers, and developers were arrested and charged for negligence linked to collapsed buildings. Public debate intensified around past construction amnesties that allowed unsafe structures to be legalized. For many survivors, accountability became just as important as rebuilding, as families demanded answers about why homes meant to protect them instead became death traps. Economically, the impact was enormous. The World Bank estimated direct physical damage in Turkey at over $34 billion, while total economic losses were projected to exceed $100 billion. In Syria, damages reached into the billions as well, compounding an already fragile economy. Entire regional industries, from agriculture to manufacturing, were disrupted, setting back development by years. Reconstruction efforts began almost immediately, with the Turkish government promising to rebuild homes, infrastructure, and public services on a massive scale. New housing projects emphasized earthquake-resistant design, while urban plans aimed to relocate communities away from the most dangerous fault zones. International aid organizations and foreign governments pledged support, providing funding, expertise, and humanitarian relief. Still, rebuilding entire cities is a process measured in years, not months. Ultimately, the 2023 Turkey earthquakes stand as a stark warning to the world. They showed that even powerful nations remain vulnerable when preparedness, enforcement, and transparency fail. The ground will shake again someday, in Turkey and elsewhere. What determines the outcome will not only be the strength of the earthquake, but the choices made long before it strikes.